But the spirit of this time stepped up to me and laid before me huge volumes, which contained all knowledge. Their pages were made of ore, and the steel stylus had engraved inexorable words in them. And he pointed to these inexorable words and spoke to me and said, "What you speak, that is madness." It is true. What I speak is the greatness and intoxication and ugliness of madness. But the spirit of the depths stepped up to me and said, "What you speak is, the greatness is, the intoxication is, the undignified, sick, paltry dailiness is. It runs in all the streets, lives in all the houses, and rules the day of all humanity. Even the eternal stars are commonplace. It is the great mistress and the one essence of God. One laughs about it, and laughter too is. Do you believe, man of this time, that laughter is lower than worship? Where is your measure, false measurer? The sum of life decides in laughter and in worship, not your judgment. I must also speak of the ridiculous. You coming men, you will recognize the supreme meaning by the fact that he is laughter and worship, a bloody laughter and a bloody worship. A sacrificial blood binds the poles. Those who know this laugh and worship in the same breath. After this, however, my humanity approached me and said, "What solitude, what coldness or desolation you lay upon me when you speak such. Reflect on the destruction of being and the streams of blood from the terrible sacrifice that the depths demand." But the spirit of the depths said, "No one can or should halt sacrifice. Sacrifice is not destruction. Sacrifice is the foundation stone of what is to come. Have you not had monasteries? Have not countless thousands gone into the desert? You should carry the monastery in yourself. The desert is within you. The desert calls you and draws you back. And if you were fettered to the world of this time with iron, the call of the desert would break all chains. Truly I prepare you for solitude." After this, my humanity remained silent. Something happened to my spirit, however, which I must call mercy. My speech is imperfect, not because I want to shine with words, but out of the impossibility of finding those words. I speak in images. With nothing else can I express the words from the depths. English astrologer Liz Green wrote a 2-volume series on C.G. Jung and astrology. One is entitled The Astrological World of Jung's Liber Novus, which analyzes and elucidates the astrological references and glyphs found throughout the writings and paintings of the infamous Red Book. Embedded within the images, for the excerpt below from the Red Book will demonstrate, the images are infinitely superior in conveying ideas from the depths that language simply cannot. Embedded within these images are Jung's visions of what is to come at the dawning of the age of Aquarius. As Peter Kingsley says in his book Catafalque, quote, "Among supporters of the popular New Age views about a coming dawn of Aquarius, the celebratory optimism is mostly only skin deep, and little more than a distraction from their underlying fears as well as despair." The hippie movement in the 1960s briefly overlapped with the last years of Jung's life, and there were many young people taking pilgrimages to Jung's home in Kusnacht to hear the wise words of the man they believed to be an intellectual force in support of this radical, transformative period in the 20th century society. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Jung knew that the aeon of Aquarius did not yield to a spiritual awakening of the masses and an expansive transcendence of human consciousness and potential. From the wise, sober eyes of a magus, he knew that the aeon of Aquarius promised many things, but at such a remarkable cost, unforeseen in the history of humanity. But even here there is no easy solution, for the zodiac sign of Aquarius is ruled by the Roman Saturn, whose original name is Kronos from the Greek. And Kronos is not simply slowness, limitation, and heaviness, attributes which are commonly associated with him, but he is also superficially, or at face value, a possessor of those exact same qualities that are so enthusiastically and optimistically sung in this song. Much of our understanding of Saturnian qualities can be found summarized in Paracelsus's Concerning the Spirits of the Planets, and specifically chapter 13 on the spirit of Saturn. Quote, "The spirit of Saturn is concrete and formed from a dry, dark, cold admixture of elements. Hence it results that amongst all others it has the least power of remaining and living in the fire. When, however, Sol and Luna have to be proved and purified, Saturn is added to them, and this has the effect of thoroughly purging them. Nevertheless, it is of that nature that it takes away their malleability. It has the same effect on me with great pains as Jupiter and Mars. Being mixed with cold, it cannot act mildly. It has the very greatest powers and virtues, whereby it cures fistulas, cancer, and similar ulcers, which come under its own degree and nature. It drives the same kind of diseases from man as it expels impurities from Luna. If it does not go out altogether at the same time, it brings more harm than it does good. Consequently, whoever would use it must know what diseases it cures, against what it should be taken, and what effects nature has assigned to it. If this be well considered, it can do no harm." Saturn and Kronos promise positive outcomes, but deliver darkness and tyranny. In essence, the promises of gifts of Kronos, like those of Pandora, are in fact an unambiguous trap, and a devastating one at that. This video is the first of a series. The aim of this first video is to provide certain references outlining the apocalyptic visions Jung had about this new transitional period into the age of Aquarius. We will mostly let Jung speak for himself. The next video will use a structuralist essay on Kronos to identify certain features of current sociological and technological trends that have broad global implications, to hopefully enforce the intuitive sense that we are indeed entering an ion governed by such a divinity. And finally, the third and last video will explore the mythos of Kronos through various historical sources of antiquity to help us identify the energia and dynamis of this god. In the Red Book, Liz Green identifies the image entitled The Water Bearer. In it, we see the representation of the self pouring out a jug of water. Green rightly identifies the image as the zodiac of Aquarius, since the water being poured out has a striking resemblance to that astrological glyph. What she fails to mention in her analysis, something that I stumbled across in a book on Egyptian magical practice, is that the squiggly line symbol is the hieroglyph used in ancient Egypt to convey the meaning of inundation, wash, or purity. These definitions are closely linked in meaning. To have a flood also washes away impurities, but at the real risk of destroying all. I will quote from a number of letters, conversations, and published writings from his collected works to give you a sense of what Jung envisioned the future containing for humanity. The future that we have all inherited, mind you. But before I do so, I want to make a quick note about apocalypse. Apocalypticism seems to get two directly opposing reactions. Either people cynically dismiss it as an expression of fanatical religiosity, or they entirely embrace it unreflectingly and expect the world to go up in flames at an imminent date in the near future. My understanding of apocalypse is rather paradoxical, in the sense that the apocalypse is always on its way. It is always just around the corner. It is always arriving eternally. But at the same time, it has already happened. When people dismiss the apocalypse and claim that it can't possibly be, they all somehow imagine a physical dissolution of the world with a large fireworks display of destruction and see the current world around them intact and relatively stable. So how could apocalypse ever really happen? But we've encountered multiple dissolutions of worlds in the realm of the human. In fact, it has been argued by some historians that the events of World War I were already a destruction of the old world that 5,000 years of European history had culminated in. So much was lost, such a discontinuity in tradition, the links to our ancestors severed almost entirely, never to be fully recovered. For those of us who are sensitive to it, it becomes clear that the world has already ended. The spirit that innervated the world has stopped expanding and has now begun to contract. We all sense that something is wrong, something radical has shifted in the fabric of reality, and that things cannot go on as they have been indefinitely. Without us knowing to what depth this change has come about and how irrevocable it is, we carry on walking to the grocery store, commuting to work, watching a show, or reading a book, without realizing that we are simply living off the fumes of a different world, a different cosmos, one that no longer is in existence, and whose image or reflection is fragmenting rapidly, like an image in the pond distorted by a thrown rock. The cosmos, as an organizing form, has ceased to hold its shape, and Jung understood all of this. Apocalyptic texts and wisdom texts from the ancient world are closely connected. As Jonathan Z. Smith concludes in his essay Wisdom and Apocalyptic, there is a, quote, relationship between apocalypticism and archaic wisdom forms such as omens, and Hellenistic wisdom forms such as astrology. These date back to Babylonian and Egyptian scribal writings. In fact, it is through scribal activity performed by priests that both wisdom and apocalyptic literature emerge and are reinterpreted. And his conclusion is that apocalypticism is not necessarily a popular religious phenomenon, but is in fact a learned genre, primarily through the distribution and the reading of scribal texts. Through his analysis, Smith also concludes that apocalyptic texts and imagery of late antiquity were not a response to religious persecution, but were, quote, an expression of the trauma of the cessation of native kingship. The lack and subsequent search for a cosmic and ruling paradigm are strong motivators for wisdom in apocalyptic literature. In essence, they give anxious expression to a void in cosmic ordering, or an encroachment of chaotic forces. We can clearly see this renewal of kingship in the ancient Egyptian paradigm of the renewal of Re and his recreation of the world by having subdued the forces of Apophis or chaos. This is a cosmogonic event that repeats itself indefinitely and renews the political sphere. Later in Christian eschatological texts, we find the incorporation of a final endpoint to cosmic history, whereas in previous cultures there was a distinct emphasis on the cyclical and rejuvenating aspects of the cosmos' destruction and subsequent recreation. And it is the latter aspects of Apocalypse that Jung is invoking, especially through his reading of Book 5 of the Sibylline Oracles, an excerpt of which I will recite below. But I want to take a perspective that rests not on exclusively Christian eschatology, but rather a Hellenistic interpretation of the events we are facing today. I do this because the book of Revelation provides ample imagery and symbolism for such an event. But how are we to understand these transitions from the perspective of the Greek pantheon? The signs are already there, but who can read them? I have not come across any resource which seek to explain current events from a Hellenistic perspective, and I do not hold the belief that the old gods are gone and irrelevant and have no contribution to world events. In fact, I strongly believe they continue to this day, and that their stories are not set in stone. By observing and analyzing their activities and attributes through antiquated texts and through the works of early theologians like Hesiod or Homer, we can detect subtle clues as to how the gods operate in our day-to-day lives. Because apocalyptic and wisdom literature seem to be related to the trauma of a cessation of native kingship, I suggest that all the signs and symbols are pointing towards the archetypal basileus, the king par excellence, Kronos. But before we speak of Kronos, let us have Jung express his thoughts on the age of Aquarius. A letter Jung addressed to Adolf Keller, the 25th of February, 1955. The drive of the unconscious towards mass murder on a global scale is not exactly a cheering prospect. Transitions between the ions always seem to have been melancholy and despairing times, as for instance the collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt between Taurus and Aries, or the melancholy of the Augustinian age between Aries and Pisces. And now we are moving into Aquarius, of which the Sibylline books say Aquarius inflames the savage forces of Lucifer. And we are only at the beginning of this apocalyptic development. Already I'm a great-grandfather twice over, and see those distant generations growing up who long after we are gone will spend their lives in that darkness. Psychology of Religion, pages 450 to 451. With this, the seer's, that is, John's range of vision extends far beyond the first half of the Christian aeon. He divines that the reign of Antichrist will begin after 1,000 years, a clear indication that Christ was not an unqualified victor. John anticipated the alchemists in Jakobuma. Maybe he even sensed his own personal implication in the divine drama, since he anticipated the possibility of God's birth in man, which the alchemists, Meister Eckhart and Angulus Silesius, also intuited. He thus outlined the program for the whole Ion of Pisces, with its dramatic enantiodromia, and its dark end which we have still to experience, and before whose, without exaggeration, truly apocalyptic possibilities mankind shudders. The four sinister horsemen, the threatening tumult of trumpets, and the brimming vials of wrath are still waiting. Could anyone in his right senses deny that John correctly foresaw at least some of the possible dangers which threaten our world in the final phase of the Christian aeon? He knew also that the fire in which the devil is tormented burns in the divine pleroma forever. God has a terrible double aspect. A sea of grace is met by a seething lake of fire, and the light of love glows with a fierce dark heat of which it is said, ardet non lucet, it burns but gives no light. That is the eternal, as distinct from the temporal gospel. One can love God, but must fear him. January 25th, 1952 at the Psychological Club in Zurich. Well, as far as Aquarius is concerned, if I wanted to say something to you there, I would have to resort to raw speculation. Actually, there are clues in the history of symbols, namely, no, I can't reveal the whole arcanum. There's laughter in the audience. These historical symbol matters are extremely interesting. I only want to draw your attention to it. I couldn't do it anyway without a constellation chart. Of course, constellation charts play a large role, but I only want to call attention to one. Above Aries is a triangle, the so-called triangulum. Andromeda is located above the first fish of Pisces. Perseus is in front of the triangle. Perseus, the great hero, frees Andromeda. Andromeda is the virgin who was bound to the rock for the dragon. She is located above the first fish. Something completely different lies above the second fish, a pneumatic symbol, Pegasus, indicated by a large square. The underlying sign next to Taurus is Ketos Magnus, the great whale, the Leviathan, extending exactly to the end of the second fish of Pisces. There he comes to an end, and the sphere of the southern fish, Piscus Ostrinus, begins. The southern fish is a small fish, while the Leviathan is a sea monster, and Aquarius must pour him water, the hydropel. The water from Aquarius flows exactly into the mouth of the fish in the constellation below. From the perspective of symbol history, that is extremely interesting. When you look at a star chart, you can see everything. You can consider what it might roughly mean. Here we have the triangle, more or less heralding Christianity. Then comes the first fish with the Virgin, the Sun Woman above it. John 12:1, quote, "A woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Then we have the square with the second fish below it. These are very interesting symbols, therefore this would fit with my expectation that if archetypes really exist, then of course they are projected onto the stars. They are always projected onto the distance because in us they are so remote. We are far away from them. They are projected onto what is further away, and people have quite naively given them a name without knowing why, from this unconscious stance. There was no recognition, no knowledge, rather a doing. They called them something and venerated them. Finally, we can see many instances in which Carl Jung references the Sibylline oracles, and so let us look at the last excerpt that seems to describe a Götterdämmerung of the zodiacs, along with the luminaries of sun and moon. May all occur, for they shall overthrow the mighty temple of the Egyptian land, and God shall rain down on the earth dire wrath among them, so that all the wicked ones and all without sense perish, and no more shall there be any sparing in that land, because they did not keep that which God gave. I saw the threatening of the shining sun among the stars, and in the lightning flash the dire wrath of the moon. The stars travailed of battle, and God gave them up to light. For long fire flames rebelled against the sun. Lucifer, treading upon Leo's back, began the fight, and the moon's double horn changed its shape. Capricorn smote Taurus's neck, and Taurus took away from Capricorn returning day. Orion would no more abide his yoke. The lot of Gemini did Virgo change in Aries. No more shone the Pleiades. Draco disavowed his zone. Down into Leo's girdle Pisces went. Cancer remained not, for he feared Orion. Scorpio down on dire Leo backwards moved, and from the sun's flame Sirius slipped away. And the strength of the mighty shining one Aquarius kindled. Uranus himself was roused until he shook the warring ones, and being incensed he hurled them down on earth. Then swiftly smitten down upon the baths of ocean, they set all the earth on fire, and the high heaven remained without a star. In the next video, we will speak more of the age of Kronos. Take care for now.